Welcome back to Reform Millennials, a podcast where we discuss the intersection of markets, politics, and pop culture. Please remember that the content of this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should be considered financial or tax advice. Please consult a professional before you make any investment decisions.
Morning, Joel.
Morning, Mel. How are you been?
Oh, good, busy, crazy time of year, but what's new? That's every week.
Every single week. I appreciate the new cadence. I also think that while we're shifting up our weeks, it's an important one to do it in terms of just what's happening globally. I believe that similarly to last year, this time we had a big tariff repricing in the market. I think currently we're going through a very similar volatile environment that is shifting positioning for a lot of people from an investment perspective. But I also think that it's shifting a lot of political assumptions, and that volatility is, I think, an opportunity for us to set the table, so to speak. So we have a pretty packed board today. We're looking personally. I'm looking at a market right now that is primed for a historic short squeeze. Market sentiment couldn't be too much more bearish than it is right now. And I believe that is partially due to a fundamental misunderstanding of the West versus East structure that has existed for probably a good part of the last 15, 20 years. And a lot of people do position the United States versus China as being a predominant geopolitical issue, but I think they've never extended that to the competition that China, or rather the allies that China also had. We'll discuss that, but then also I want to touch on, most recently, 2 days ago, OpenAI mentioned that they were going to officially realize that the consumer AI space is not where money is going to be made, and that they have now repositioned themselves and have started to chase and focus on the enterprise market. And I think that is incredibly important. But before we touch on Iran, market structure, AI, I want you to help me understand where we are at locally, or rather from Canada's perspective. There was a lot of what I think is news that has gone under the radar because of the heat in the Middle East. If you could please try to connect the dots for me. There's to me, a massive disconnect between the people that are in Canada and the news. Please help me understand what's going on in our backyard. Just last week, we found out that we shedded 84,000 jobs in January. The Bank of Canada has a rate cut expected tomorrow. I think it's kind of a toss-up right now. Beneath the surface, it seems as though there's a few parts of our private market that are cracking. I've taken a few meetings with real estate developers and private REIT owners that are struggling to find financing and are needing to fire sale assets. No one's talking about this stuff. The macro clouds are decidedly focused on the United States, and I would love for you to kind of reconnect everything for me.
Absolutely. It's really interesting timing as well, because you're talking about 1 year since the sort of tariff market implications. It actually, on March 14th, was also the 1 year anniversary of Prime Minister Carney being in that role. We, of course, had a federal election following that, but he became the prime minister on March 14th, 2025, after winning the Liberal leadership race. So it's been a year of Carney as well, which seems crazy. It seems like it's been way longer than that, but also not that long at all in so many ways. I think that when we look at the political landscape in Canada right now, I think I'm noticing a few different trends. From a vibes perspective, there does seem to be a renewed reset on how people are viewing Canada. And I would attribute that largely to Mark Carney's leadership and Mark Carney's history and his resume and just the relationships that he has with leaders all around the world, given his time in the private sector and as governors of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England. He's definitely, on vibes, put Canada a little bit more on the map. He's also, from a perspective of Canada-US relations and all of the difficulties that countries that trade and do business with the US, which is many countries in the developed world, a little bit of a juxtaposition in terms of Carney is a very traditional, polished, gentlemanly like vibe, whereas Trump is absolutely not that and is taking a different approach in terms of his own PR. So I see this as being one of the sort of markers of what we're looking at from a vibes perspective. We do see, though, that Canada is not necessarily better off economically or from a jobs perspective or investment perspective than it was before Carney took his role. I don't know that I would totally place that responsibility at Carney's feet, because I do think that Canada was in a concerning and rapid decline under Prime Minister Trudeau. And I think that no leader, conservative, liberal, is going to be able to turn that around in a short period of time. But I think the most sort of telling or the most revealing of trends that I'm seeing right now is that we actually don't have a deal with the US when it comes to tariffs. Carney is out in the media this week and last week, and since he's been prime minister, talking about the fact that Canada has a relatively better deal and relationship with the US than many other countries. And while that may be true, Carney was elected by many people on the Trump issue. And I would say that if we are being honest, that issue is neither better than it was before he came into power. I don't know that it's necessarily worse. I think with some of the decisions Canada has made on its foreign policy, that's sort of yet to be determined, but it's sort of status quo when it comes to the relationship with the US. So we see stronger vibes from a Canada perspective, relatively standard economic and maybe slightly worse jobs numbers, and from a Trump perspective, status quo as well. So while a lot has happened in the last year, a lot has also not happened in the last year in terms of improving the lives of everyday Canadians. Again, not necessarily something that we need to fully blame Carney for, but I think the question is, how long do we wait from a political perspective for a leader to be in power before we start to lay a lack of progress or declining progress at their feet? So politically, I'd say that's where we're at.
Well, if you are a Liberal voter, you can't be anything but happy with his performance. He's been able to land a majority without winning that last year.
Almost, yeah.
Very close.
Yeah.
I'd say that from a political power perspective, successful 12 months for him. As somebody who is a little bit more critical, and I think you would find yourself in this camp, I would say that he is bumping up on the put up or shut up point from a market structure performance perspective, outperformed the United States last year. TSX has outperformed the S&P by 5% this year. Obviously, the lion's share of that performance is a contribution from our energy industry, which makes up a significantly larger portion of our market than the United States. So the vibes have been strong. We are a commodity exporter. We have outperformed as a result of that. Our banks are struggling. The rest of our economy is not doing particularly well. The funniest and I think contradictory part of all of this is that during moments of high volatility, the part of the market that the Liberal and left have long criticized and villainized is the one that carries the day. Mm-hmm. This is also what brings all of our trade power and negotiating power. It is what the part of the market we hate or they hate, but it is what brings us and it's the bullets that are loaded in our gun. So I think if people are attributing success to whether our market performance or even just jobs numbers staying relatively stable, inflation being reasonably under control, I want to draw their attention to why that is. And so for me, I'm giving him till August to show us something. We have a few MOUs that are important. We have a trade deal that needs to be ratified and continued. I believe that there are a lot of things. He's going to be a busy man this summer. So I'd like to see something there. Now, without kind of diving into anything further on the Canadian political front, I want to do a little bit of a market update because it's been a volatile month. February is always tough, always. But March has, whenever Trump's been in power, seemed to be a very, very busy one for market participants too. But obviously, we have a war in the Middle East, and if you're gauging market and investor sentiment, it is very low. But asset prices don't make their biggest moves because of fundamentals. They often do so via positioning. And right now, that's the game. Right now, you see headlines that are to me, missing. If you're only reading the headlines, you're missing the underlying mechanics of what's actually happening in this market. We were looking at the first week of flows just yesterday in my team, and equity ETFs have seen major outflows. You've seen people piling into the US dollar, and it's bumping up against the very important, the DXY is bumping up against the 100 number, which is very, very important because that is risk off. And if you look at short ETFs, they're surging. If you're looking at the VIX, if you're looking at the levered VIX, if you're looking at oil prices and backwardation, very, very complex market. Credit spreads are starting to widen. There is some financial metrics that are fracturing. This is important, and that's when you see the crowd and sentiment this negative, with the S&P 500 and TSX holding up. That, to me, is showing you that investors are offside and that their assumption is very wrong. When positioning gets this one-sided, the risk completely shifts. It's no longer about how much lower stocks can go, because, boy, we've barely broken down more than 4 or 5% from all-time highs. It's about how catastrophically wrong this positioning can be. And participants, to me, are offside in this current moment. And when you have record shorts and you have a flight to safety and markets aren't breaking down, what's going to light the match the other direction? So if you're looking at the geopolitical chessboard, you're seeing that a lot of things being Mel, you would be surprised, but I get, 10 text messages every couple of days about all the negative headlines in the Middle East and how this administration has no plan, and that oil prices are over 100, and that backwardation, or rather 6-month contracts, are starting to rise, and how this is going to impact inflation, and that the Fed's never going to be able to cut rates, and all of these negative markers. And we're just 14 days into this war. I mean, Fareed Zakaria just went on CNN and had this long monologue about how the United States is becoming the British Empire. Like, truthfully, this is all a distraction. And to me, this is somewhat, Fareed Zakaria's argument particularly, is somewhat lazy. And it misses the point on so many metrics. I think, interestingly, and as I mentioned in my opening, I mentioned that the Chinese have been the concerning geopolitical opponent for the United States for probably the better part of a decade. And for the last 3 or 4 administrations, it has been a pretty hot Iran has been a very hot topic. There's no shortage of video replay of the Clinton administration, Hillary, Obama, Bush Jr., even Biden, talking about the dangers. Chuck Schumer, for crying out loud, talking about the dangers of a nuclear Iran. And today you see this cognitive dissonance between the two realities of a party that is now suggesting that there was no risk in Iran, that this most recent invasion was unjustified, and that they have no plan whatsoever. And it's tough to grapple with all of this and position from an investment perspective if you have, to me, an incorrect view of past history. And
or just an inaccurate one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just completely untrue. And it's very, very clear, just if you look at a map, that Iran has, for as long as I've been alive, controlled the Strait of Hormuz, which controls 20% of oil exports to the rest of the globe. And whether we like it or not, oil is still the lifeblood of the global economy. If you siphon off, or if you remove 20% from trade in a very, fungible, but a very short duration in terms of the cycle of energy and its refinement and deployment to consumers, when you start to remove 20% for an extended period of time, pricing and things become an issue. And when you have a geopolitical opponent to the United States, to the West, that is controlled or does control that strait, you are fairly obviously in a bad position. So to suggest that the United States doesn't have any interests in the region or any justification for the elimination of a nuclear Iran, I think that is just intellectually dishonest. And to me, a nuclear Iran is structurally a China-friendly Middle East. And China's plans and handling of yuan-denominated oil trade and how that can be disruptive to Western interests, I find it very dishonest. So from my perspective, there is downside risk market-wise to a $200 a barrel oil. However, I don't believe that is necessarily going to be the outcome. Just this week, we've seen a major rally in markets where the S&P 500 up 2-ish% from its lows of last Friday. Over the weekend, we saw a few ships get escorted through the Strait to Iran or to India. There are a few partners or shipping partners that are taking risks. You have India escorting some of those ships to their shores, and there is a marketable rally around securing that strait. I just think that what is occurring is this forced reality check from a geopolitical perspective. And go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, it's a forced reality check, and it is no wonder why there are some people who are struggling with this reality check, because the reality is wrapped in a box that they don't like, with Donald Trump being president of the United States. So if you cannot get personally past the idea that Donald Trump may be, and history will tell, a bad president doing the right thing on certain issues, then it's going to be impossible for you to entertain or even just psychologically reckon with the fact that this individuals can do bad things on certain issues and good things, or things that are actually in the best interest of their country, their culture, their civilization on other issues. And I think that we as a society, and again, I don't want to put too much of a tinfoil hat on with some of this, but I think that this has all over the past 10, 20, 30 years been a deliberate effort by people adversaries to Western civilization to divide society on these issues in Western cultures, particularly in the US and Canada. I think it is absolutely no coincidence that our societies are just as divided as they are right now, at a time where we're at an inflection point in the New World Order and which values are going to prevail. Mark Carney wrote the book on values. And I think that it is not conceivable to us that there are actually actors in the world that are so anti our known civilization, that actually have studied history and actually do understand how these dynamics work over time. We've conveniently, in Western societies, not everybody, of course, like there are a lot of people who do pay attention, but we are addicted to clickbait news. We're getting all of our information from people who do not have an expertise or even a working knowledge of history in a way where they should be making predictions. Again, everybody's allowed their opinion, but in 100 years ago, you didn't hear bad opinions because they had to go through a little bit more of a filter in terms of dissemination of information, etc. So I find it incredibly frustrating to have discussions about what's happening in the world with individuals who don't want to accept the realities of what the world is and what has happened in the past, and referring to those patterns. I don't think that you have to be a warmonger to to understand that there is a strategic value to what is going on in Iran. And I think that if you don't know enough about the Middle East or about history, it'd be very easy for you to assume that what's going on in Iran right now is the same thing that went on in Iraq or Afghanistan or any other world sort of war or conflict that the US has engaged with. And it's not. And I think that what is particularly concerning about this conflict is the way in which we're seeing very dangerous justifications for the criticism of Trump that, for me personally, rub up against some forms of hatred and anti-Semitism, frankly, that people's reactions to some of these things almost can't be explained in any other way. And I don't think this is happening at a conscious level for many people. Is what's so frustrating, is that I don't believe that people are conscious of the ways in which they're being complicit in the goals of regimes that are not aligned with their actual values, but have sort of subverted and manipulated the way that we are interpreting world events. I'm not saying that Donald Trump makes all the right decisions and that there are not things that have happened in the Middle East that are not questionable or deserving of discussion. But I think that if you want to narrow down this conflict to one question, and it's, is the world safer with a denuclearized and not regime Ayatollah running Iran? The answer is yes. And I understand there are costs to that. And I understand there are very real and serious costs, human life, all of these things that do not make me happy or do not seem like collateral damage to me. But again, this time that we're in right now is not like anything else people in our generation have experienced. And we look back, for those of us who have some working knowledge of what happened in World War I and World War II and the series of events that led to those being known as world wars, none of these conflicts start by saying, okay, in 1939, we're going to declare World War II. That's not how these things happen. And usually it's not one swift decision that leads to that. But I think that if you were to ask most people if the world is a better place after World War II, I don't know what people's responses would be, but I do believe that there was some good that came out of that. Of course, I'm not saying I like war. I'm not trying to say that there wasn't extreme, terrible. I feel like I'm over explaining right now, but like, I'm not saying that's, a good thing, but like, we do have to look at how history and human nature has unfolded in the past and have some serious discussions about the fact that we're not in a time period right now where we have any good options. There's a lot of bad and crappy options, and it's about making the choices with those terrible options that are going to lead to a world that is reflective of what I value is Western open societies and democracies, where you and I can have these conversations, talk about how much we like or don't like Carney, and not worry for our safety in Canada.
Have you ever seen The Man in the High Castle?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so it's a hypothetical World War II TV show from, I think it was like 2015 or 2016. And the TV show sort of depicts this 1960s world where the Allied powers actually lost to Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. And you have this totalitarian America that people are living in. And it kind of just shows you what the cost of a loss of World War II would be. And I think that this, while maybe perhaps is a little bit hyperbolic, the reality is that there is constant jostling, tug of war that occurs with like Western versus Eastern ideals, difference in values. And there's a cost to that. And it's not a small one. And I think it's important for us, not just on November 11th, to remember what we lost to uphold those values. So I guess to kind of reroute this conversation, I do believe over the next 6 months, we're going to see a continuation of a comparison of America to the British Empire, that the United States is over allocating resources to a region that they think isn't important. And what I want to make an argument for is, one, it is an incredibly important region. And for the reasons that people are, and I think the left is purposely ignoring. And then also help people understand that geopolitical West versus East isn't just a China versus the United States, but it is an allied powers versus let's use Axis. I'm not sure that's appropriate, but the Chinese have their conduits, and Iran is one of them, was one of them. And when you have to stress these situations out, this is what occurs. And it's very, very tumultuous. It's very challenging. And from a political perspective, the one area in which the Trump administration is doing a very poor job and is communication. And this has long been an issue of theirs. They haven't stated any mandate or any ideological end to this war. Trump will say one thing and then another. Nothing's consistent. The messaging isn't consistent. And the truth of the matter is, I don't believe that this war is anything similar, reasoning-wise, to why they went to Iraq. While it might rhyme, it's certainly not the same. And
it rhymes because it's in the same region.
It's in the same region, and the major exports are all the same. The thing that I want to call people's attention to specifically is that a big reason for the Afghanistan and Iraq failure, so to speak, I believe, was messaging, and they lost the political battle. And that political battle is how the voting class of people viewed that war, viewed American interests or Canadian interests or Western interests. And they lost sight of values. And Trump is doing a very, very bad job. And he's always been horrible at messaging in this region, in this area. He's done a great job talking to his base to win elections, but I believe they're doing a bad job with regards to communication. So now, interestingly, as an investor, I actually believe that creates incredible opportunity in terms of like, how can we position ourselves? When you see this cognitive dissonance for myself, it starts to show up in other places as well. And this is my transition out, Mel. I hope it's appropriate, but I believe that there's also this forced reality check in what's happening in tech right now. And for the last, basically since the end of 2022, the leading trend and momentum driver has been AI. You had your ChatGPT moment in 23, you had your IO moment in at the end of 23, early 24, then you had ChatGPT 4.0 moment, and then you had very recently Anthropic's Opus 4.5, 4.6. And there's just been this onslaught of new features that they keep dropping. And interestingly, I made this point in a few posts on LinkedIn. I can't remember if I went back and look, I would guess it was beginning of 2025. I made the comment that Anthropic was making the right choice to focus on enterprise. Because if there is truly an incredible return on investment for AI and its integration into business, into our lives, and from an efficiencies perspective, do you think it's going to be the individual consumer that takes it upon themselves to deploy it? Or is it going to be the corporation with profitability and profit incentives? Because I know who I'm going to bet on. I would venture to guess that it's going to be the business that makes the move first. And interestingly, Anthropic's choice to integrate into enterprise while from a fundraising perspective, has left them less interesting than ChatGPT or OpenAI, because the consumer usage is occurring there. It's louder. It's gaining all the headlines. Anthropic has all of the enterprise contracts. And just this past weekend, Sam Altman realigned or refocused OpenAI to the enterprise to compete, in addition to signing their contract with Microsoft's, I don't know if you saw this release from Satya, but they just released a Copilot Cowork, which is going to find itself onto in the Microsoft 365 suite. This is a very big deal. And I think what is driving the decision from Sam Altman. And the Anthropic team saw where the puck was going and was right. Sam Altman has been chasing for 6 months. But most interestingly, I think what this is somewhat similar to is the Uber runway situation, where Uber, I don't know if you remember this, Mel, I'm sure you do, but you could take an Uber into downtown Edmonton for less than $5 or less than $10 because they were effectively making the service free. And the same thing has occurred with large language models for the better part of the last three years. The private market investors, venture capitalists are funding our free usage. But that day is starting to come to an end. The black hole that is the cash flow incinerator, the cash incinerator that is ChatGPT free without ads, etc. I think it's about to meet its D-Day. Once these companies go public, there's no more. There's no more free everything. The only place that people are going to be able to find cheap and or free large language models is likely going to be through Google or through Facebook, because they have a way of showing return on investment. They have a way of building ad products that feed you a almost perfect delivery of ad product without you even realizing, and them receiving a very significant increase on return on their ad program. Now,
so Joel, what do you think about this analogy when it comes to some of this stuff? In business and in investments, I always like to look, if I'm looking at a business, I say, okay, usually that businesses find success by selling cheap stuff to everyone or expensive stuff to people with the means of capital. Is AI a comparable model here when you consider like what the capital outflows and requirements are? Like AI is not an inexpensive, and LLMs are not inexpensive tools. And we've been, to your point, subsidizing the cost of them for that like mass adaptation. Would that be an okay take, or is that kind of offside?
I think the framing is somewhat accurate. But I think where it isn't necessarily true is that there is a justification for a winner take all market here. And I would argue that framing it as luxury versus commodity is certainly an area which we don't have an answer for yet. I think there's probably a good portion of the 800 or 900 million active users or weekly active users on ChatGPT that don't even know that there's a paid product. So I guess with regards to you suggesting that there's like this luxury area that is paying a sum of money for we'll call it Opus 4.6 plus, Gemini Ultra, ChatGPT's version, all of those being between the cost of $150 and $250 a month. Interestingly, the amount of tokens you are utilizing at that, we'll call it ultra level, plus level, is still roughly, I don't know, 80% discount to what it actually costs for them to run those, to produce those tokens for you. Where I think this is most important is actually to show, and the reason why they're making this transition isn't because they want to go up market in terms of selling to wealthier people, because those wealthy people are already paying probably upwards of $1,000 a month for their AI stack on the computer. I know I'm basically not calling myself wealthy necessarily, but I am a heavy user of these things, and I'm spending $800 or $650 a month on them. And
I'd call this household lucky if we're also spending less than that.
Yes, I know for a fact.
Our data farm in the den over there, I don't even want to know what that costs.
Yeah. So interestingly, I actually believe that this is more so to show, one, to go public, and also two, if people are really going to see the power and the return and the importance of the integration of these models, where they're going to see it first, they're going to see it at work.
Right.
And the best place for these folks to integrate their brands will be in the enterprise. Not only that, those folks, business users, will see the value, the return, and then they will start to deploy additional capital there. And Interestingly, this just justifies the amount of CapEx that's been outlaid by the hyperscalers, even more so. Just yesterday, I was watching the Jensen NVIDIA GTC, and he suggested they have $1 trillion in sales backlog right now.
Wow.
$1 trillion. I don't think people quite grasp how large that number is.
It's a lot of millions.
It's a lot of millions.
And a lot of billions.
Yeah. So we are not in a bubble is effectively what I'm trying to get people to understand. Furthermore, the fact that the adoption from an enterprise perspective is accelerating proves that there's a return on investment, which has been the question in this market for the last 9 months. And you're seeing a grappling with pricing of the neoclouds. So you have a grouping of people that are investing heavily in GPUs. Then you have Oracle, which is this data infrastructure, and then also a massive infrastructure of GPUs, coherent GPUs that people are able to train and then deploy their products on. Just recently, we had the entire outlay of software companies speak to the uptick in usage of AI agents. This cycle is just beginning. And if you believe that this market is going to puke all over itself and go down 50% and because we're in a bubble, you're missing the ball. You're not seeing where the puck's going. Currently, we're seeing more and more news show this. And the bottlenecks that we're starting to roll ourselves through different bottlenecks right now. I mean, last year was the story of energy and memory being the bottleneck. This year, it's very clear that it's, in addition to memory, it's photonics, it's data transfer, data management. There's going to be more down the line. So, I mean, in the newsletter that I'm going to post this week, it's going to go through a lot of this stuff. But I think positionally, if you're betting on a collapse and a reversion to we'll call it a hyperscaler group that is going to slow down their CapEx in the next 2 quarters, I think you're wrong. And more interestingly, where we're going to have to start paying attention and where I think the next big problem is going to be is, one, politically, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but 2, it's going to be in the unemployment and white collar job cuts. And just over the weekend, Meta said that they're going to cut 20% of workforce. I thought this was a really important data point, but so Facebook is roughly $1.4, $1.6 trillion business, depending on the day. And they have 65 to 75,000 employees. That's a lot of employees. Salesforce, which a lot of folks will know if they work in enterprise or they work in sales of sorts, that business has 10,000 more employees at a $300 or $280 billion market cap. 10,000 more employees.
That's wild.
What do you think is going to happen to that workforce? It's going to get cut in half.
Yeah.
And you're going to see this everywhere. And it is going to cause a major issue politically. These are going to be folks that feel disenfranchised, that are going to start voting not with an ideological bend. They're going to vote based on their economic situation. And we're going to need a retooling and a re-education and a focus for folks in their 30s, 40s, well, 20s, 30s, 40s on how to use these tools and make them powerful for you. Because if you do not have the agency to wield them, you're going to find yourself without a job. And that is concerning to me. So that's just a prediction of the future. And I think it's going to become increasingly more loud this upcoming summer.
Interesting. Yeah, I struggle sometimes on a philosophical level as well. Like, I totally get what you're saying, where we're talking about it could not be a bubble, but I struggle. And I don't think this is actually like the majority of AI and LLM use, but I struggle to understand how we will continue to just be okay with I think people call it like AI slop. If I see one more Substack article that is meant to be from the position of somebody having thought leadership that is so obviously written by artificial intelligence or an LLM, like I wonder if there will be a little bit of a reversion back because of the way that people are using these things. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and this is almost like a philosophical and like esoteric question in terms of the proper use of these technologies. And it strikes me that if we're just going to substitute using AI with absolutely everything that we do and have almost no care or thought in terms of how we're integrating those things into our lives, I do wonder if it will blow back a little bit. Like the example that I was talking to my friend about is like, if it is your job to think and opine and come up with ideas and see patterns, then I think that if you use ChatGPT for that purpose itself, rather than just a supporting role in that purpose to streamline things and make things easier, I think that's actually going to cause like, it's going to cause job problems, but it's going to cause like psychological, philosophical problems as well. And I know I keep raising this as like an alarmist, but I'm actually very worried about that. And I think that, you know,
people are going to lose their ability to think critically. They're going to lose agency. They're going to stop trusting themselves. This is how
yes.
I listened to this awesome interview. I'm going to post this as well. I did in our last newsletter, but I think it needs to be posted. But where the interviewer talked about, or asked, or rather the interviewer asked the interviewee this simple question that, do you think we're going to allow AI to make our decisions for us? And how is it going to present itself? And he said, interestingly, folks are going to it's going to sneak up on us, and it'll be a trick. We won't even know that it's happening. It'll just occur under the guise that a human is delivering it. And as you just said, you're seeing all of these Substack posts, and I think that's because of the world that you and I live in, which is we have all these we have these thought leaders. We read a lot of what they're posting. They're content creators, and I can sense it immediately, and I know you can too.
Immediately. And it's straight to jail. Like I will lose respect for you instantly if I see any resemblance of AI in your thought leadership writing. Like get out of here with that.
Completely.
I can't stand it. I'm very upset about it.
Interestingly, what I believe is going to become much more important, and now this is just me and you talking strategy, it feels like, but this is what will be the diet of folks wanting to clean out the slop. The written word is going to become more and more untrustworthy, and in-person audio as a medium, video as a medium is going to become that much more important. And from if you cannot eloquently and thoughtfully lay out your thoughts and explain how things are moving and talk with people about the products that you're trying to sell them or the services that you're providing, and you think you're going to be able to convey that via email and land customers, people that are decision makers, they've already sensed your BS. They've worked with these models long enough to know how they're going to be. And quite frankly, I think that they're going to get so good that you may not be able to. And decision makers, they have agency, and they will call into question everything if they can't, even if they can't understand or discern the difference in the communication at the base level, which means that we're going to move closer and closer to the individual, closer and closer in person. Obviously, video and audio make things much more real. It's very difficult to replace that structure. So that to me is going to be the result of the AI slop pandemic that I think is currently occurring.
100%. And it's just as much of a like, how do you get through the 100 years of your life without just like suffering every single day versus like the economics of it? Yes, you need a job. Yes, you need all of those things. Of course, we all need to think about those economic consequences, but like you also have to, unless we're going to just not have human life anymore, you also have to sit in your body and in your mind and think about things. And your brain is a muscle, and you flex and exercise your brain by doing hard things. And I will just forever be on this cautionary tale of like, if you have figured out what your thing in life is, say you're a mathematician, a writer, etc., do not use AI to replace the hard work that is required for you to actually be good at that thing. You can use AI, but you will be robbing yourself of a special part of the human experience if you do that. And I just think we should not do that.
I would also say that you're going to rob yourself of your understanding of what made you great in the first place.
Yeah.
And interestingly, it's similar to how the last 50 years we have learned to train our bodies via exercise. Mm-hmm. Mental exercise is going to become very prevalent. You're going to start all those health podcasts. These folks are all going to talk about how we need to be reading more books. Mm-hmm. And there's a ton of research coming out right now of people analyzing the brain during and after a certain amount of usage of large language models in their workflow versus folks that have used it differently. And mm-hmm. we're starting to understand, well, one, its impacts on our brain and our bodies. And then two, how to avoid that damage or perceived damage and then harness it. So it's going to be this new, I mean, this is so funny that the better our life gets, the higher our standard of living becomes, the more technology replaces hard work, the more we then need to focus on what made us durable in the first place. Mm-hmm. Where we became so sedentary because we're sitting at our desks all the time. And so we needed to have hours in which we worked out. Whereas in the past, you used to literally just walk around constantly and hunt for and gather your food. Correct. The Industrial Revolution now, this being the AI or AI era, AI revolution, is going to cause the same destruction of our brain. And we need to exercise it now, which is crazy.
You need to have chest press for your brain, like you do. Yeah. And so with that, I'll say follow me on Goodreads because that's my new social media medium that I'm going to become an influencer on.
Hey, you know what? I have not had a bad book recommendation from you, so I'll follow you there.
Yeah. I actually am very good at book recommendations and I do still read books. Now we're just talking about technology now, but I had a kind of a fight with some of our friends about books versus Kindle. And I will allow a Kindle at the bedside table because it's not fully technological. Like if anybody who uses a Kindle knows it's like analog as it gets when it comes to books. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I digress. Read real books. If you need to read Kindle, you can Kindle, but read the book. Don't listen to the audiobook or get the ChatGPT summary.
Yeah, I'm very okay with audiobooks. You and I can disagree on that. But if you are ChatGPT summarizing things, you are not learning. And I mean, Naval just had a podcast on this, and he said that if you were to get 100 people to read the same book, the takeaways that they're going to have from it are going to be completely different than ChatGPT's takeaways from those books. And if you were to get the ChatGPT summary of the book after you've read it, it would not be the same one that you would write for yourself. And I think that that's very, 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 very important for people to understand.
Or not, and just continue to use those tools and then let people who actually are going to focus on those things. Yeah, I'm ready for this period we're entering into because I feel like this is my time. I've done all of these things. I've been working hard on all of this. I'm like, give me the opportunity to shine in these conditions now.
No, I think that you are positioned well. I'm a little bit concerned for the people in their 20s. But you know what? Is this part of just becoming or getting older, at least in my case? Probably. I'm getting a little bit older. I'm getting a little bit annoyed. I'm listening to the same music from when I was 16 to 22. All of these things. I talk about how bad music is and culture is. I'm old. However, I do think that there is some truth baked into that generational advancement. And so with that, and I think this is a good way for us to sign off, Mel, for those that are younger that are listening, please start reading real books.
And stop saying slay.
Yeah, exactly.
For the love of God.
Mel, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Joel. Take care.
That's all for today. Thanks for listening. If you found this valuable, please subscribe and share it with a friend. As always, the information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial and/or tax advice. Please consult a licensed professional for your own personal situation. Joel is a registered portfolio manager and investment advisor, and clients of his and his firm may own securities discussed on this podcast.